I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the 2-door Defender 90, the 4-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network.
Thank you once again, Casper Mattresses, for sponsoring this podcast. The Casper is an obsessively engineered mattress at a shockingly fair price. Supportive memory foams create an award-winning sleep surface with just the right sink and just the right bounce. Try Casper for 100 nights risk-free in your own home, or if you want, in someone else's home if you ship it to them. If you don't love it, they'll pick it up and refund you everything. Casper understands the importance of truly sleeping on a mattress before you commit, especially considering you're going to spend a third of your life on it. Free shipping and returns to US and Canada. You can get $50 towards any mattress purchase by visiting www.casper.com/James and using offer code JAMES. Terms and conditions apply. FreshBooks is the ridiculously easy-to-use cloud accounting software that's made for people like you and me who can't stand doing their taxes, because FreshBooks keeps all of your cash flow details in one place, so you know exactly what invoices you sent, who's paid you, and what your income is. And their mobile app allows you to take pictures of your receipts and organize them for later, which makes claiming expenses a total breeze. So for a 30-day free trial, just go to freshbooks.com/James and enter the code JAMES in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Today on the James Altucher Show.
So I was early on a sniper. As a new guy, our platoon of 16 needed 2 snipers. So our chief one day comes to myself and Glenn Doherty, said, hey, you guys are going to go to sniper school. So we were new guys, and new guys didn't get that opportunity. So we were excited but terrified.
Obviously, I don't want to learn how to be a sniper during this podcast. It's not going to happen. But really, I want to, you have this great quote. The point of your school was not just to make everybody masters of shooting, but make them masters of their own fate. And I feel that's what this podcast is about.
I wanted to give people the uncomfortable look behind the curtain on what it's really like to take another person's life. What is war like? And, what's it like when my friend Alex in the book shoots a bad guy in Afghanistan and watches in this village as his 13-year-old son runs out to save his dad. And then he comes back and deals with that because he has his own son who's 13 and broke down after the mission. I belong to this entrepreneurs organization, and we were going around our forum, and they were asking if you had a miracle, what would that look like? When it got to me, I said, a miracle to me would be world peace. No more killing each other.
Brandon Webb, you maggot piece of shit. What makes you think you're good enough to come on this podcast, you dirty piece of slime? Get down and do 50 push-ups. No, sorry, 5,000 push-ups. I always wanted to do
5,000
that,
would,
Brandon.
yeah, 5,000 would take a while.
So I always wanted to act just once in my life like an army sergeant in boot camp. Is that like, did I do an okay job? Can you?
Yeah, no, that wasn't too bad.
Well, you do it now.
Let me think. I have to put myself in Bud's instructor
Yeah.
mode.
So imagine I'm just behind everybody, and I'm like, it looks like I'm gasping for air.
Yeah. So I like to get in people's head. I did a instructor swap for Hell Week. They recruit guys to come and work this period in SEAL training where we keep the guys up for 5.5 days straight. So we work 3 8-hour shifts. And I like to get in their head. So I would come up to you very quietly and go, James, you made my list. And you would kind of look at me and imagine like you're eating wet, right? I'm spraying you down with a hose and cold water, and you're watching. We make the students watch the sun go down. And I would say, you made the list. It's going to be a long fucking night for you. So I just need you to think about that as you watch the sun go down. So I would get in their head and just mess with them quietly. So I was more like the psychological, like put pressure on them that way.
It reminds me of a saying from the chess playing world, which shows my geeky roots. But the saying is, the threat is stronger than the execution. So when you get in their head and give them more possibilities to think about, even though you know what you're going to do next, then that makes it harder for them to make their next decision.
Yeah, I had literally done exactly what I just described. And one of the Master Chief Philpott, his son was going through SEAL training, and I didn't realize his son was one of the guys I just went up to. I looked at scanning the class, and you just kind of look for weakness, who's kind of on the, not all present. And I went probably to 12 guys, and 6 of them quit before the meal even finished. Like just sitting there, I hadn't even touched them or laid a hand on them.
I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But first, let me do a little intro. Brandon Webb, you're author of The Killing School, because you basically taught the School of Snipers, which among other people who graduated was Chris Kyle, which the movie American Sniper is about. You wrote an excellent memoir called The Red Circle, which I've read, and I want to go into that a little bit as well. That was a New York Times bestseller, correct?
Yep.
And this one, The Killing School, is guaranteed to be a New York Times bestseller. It's a great book, and there's a lot of things I want to go over. So let me. I don't normally do this, but let me go down the table of contents of what I want to cover.
Let's do it.
So I want to cover essentially your thoughts on war in Iraq, because this is always. I have an 18-year-old daughter, and you couldn't put a gun to my head and give me $20 million and say, send your kid to war. I would just never do it. And I would, hold her down before she got on a plane to war. And so we can go over that, because I know you have varying opinions on that. And also the whole issue of teaching people to kill people. That's almost like the elephant in the room for me.
Yeah.
I kind of want to go through the arc of your career. You were one of the first people in Afghanistan after 9/11. Then you had another deployment in Iraq. I kind of want to, discuss your own ups and downs, and then kind of returning from war to face a conflicted America, and how you built a career around that, and your current career. Most importantly, so we'll get to it fairly quickly. I don't want to learn how to be a sniper during this podcast. It's not going to happen. Although I did take rifle shooting lessons a few weeks ago on 20th Street or 21st Street, one of those streets. And but I want to talk about peak performance, which I feel your book is really, both your books, Red Circle and Killing School, are really about, and particularly your sections on mental management and the story of the guy Sands, who was a POW for many years in Vietnam, and how he got through it. But really, I want to you have this great quote. The point of your school was not just to make everybody masters of being, shooting, but make them masters of their own fate. And I feel that's what this podcast is about, more than, just kind of learning your specific skill that you learn. And then that's my table of contents for this podcast. Good. So before we get into the guts of The Killing School, war. What is it good for? You obviously were into it. From an early age, you were, you were ready to go. What's the deal? Like, when is it called for? Why teach people to kill? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, so, in many ways, as we were talking earlier, I'm anti-war. I think war is a terrible thing. I do, unfortunately, and I, as a guy that's been out for a few years now, and built a business and run a business for 10 years, I've had a chance to reflect, and it's just sad. It saddens me that I can live in a beautiful city like New York with the arts and all this creativity, and think that we're still not evolved enough, that we're killing each other with hacking each other to death in North Africa and dropping bombs and shooting each other with lead bullets. It's just barbaric. And for how far we've come as a society, it's sad that there's parts of the world where that still happens, and there's environments that produce these terrible, evil people that, and that's the catch-22, right? It's like the schoolyard bully. Like, if no one's willing to stand up to the bully, and people do bad things. You look back to World War II and Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust and how terrible that was. So I do still think that war serves a purpose, as much as I think it's terrible, and I wish that I belong to this entrepreneurs organization, and we were going around our forum, and they were asking if you had a miracle and woke up one day, what would that look like? And to me, when it got to me, I said a miracle to me would be world peace. Like, no more killing each other. We're working to advance society.
But let me ask you about that. Like, let's just take Afghanistan and Iraq. Obviously ruled by what we consider to be evil people, and they were. I mean, 9/11 was the worst travesty on American soil ever. And I lived, I don't know where you were on that exact day, but I had breakfast at the World Trade Center that morning and was just walking up with my business partner. We saw the plane flying right overhead. Everybody kind of instinctively ducked, even though it was 600 feet higher. And my mind almost went into denial. I'm like, I even said out loud, like, that plane must be empty, because we watched the plane go right into the building. Yeah. And I said, even though it was like 8:45, I said, nobody's in, it's too early. Nobody's in the World Trade. Like, my mind went into this weird denial, and my business partner kept saying, no, we're under attack. Yeah. And I'm like, no, that's impossible. And then, of course, we saw the second plane go in, and then the Pentagon, and it started to connect. But, to some extent, look, we armed Osama bin Laden when they were fighting the Soviets. We trained Al-Qaeda, and I'm not justifying anything. I'm saying, why should we have gotten involved even in the beginning 15 years earlier?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think looking back over the past, 50 years, America has kind of lost its course, especially in my opinion, and from a foreign policy strategy point of view. Strategies should be easily understood from the top down. And you could go out on the street right now and ask people, what is our foreign policy strategy, like America's foreign policy strategy in the world? And I think you'd get a different answer from everybody.
What do you think our strategy is?
I think we don't have a strategy. It's one of the big, I was critical of both the Bush administration and Obama for really creating more instability in the world. And that's what we've done. We look at the situation you explained with Osama bin Laden. Like, we armed and trained those guys when they were to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan.
And the Soviets don't exist, and Al-Qaeda now bombs us.
Yeah. And then the irony there is, now you look at the conflict in the Middle East. Like, we essentially created this instability in Iraq, created a situation where an organization like ISIS can emerge.
Right, and now Iran could become, because Iraq was always the buffer against Iran. Yeah. Now it's an completely unstable situation in the Middle East. And by the way, once again, we're the ones who armed Iraq to fight Iran in the first place.
Now you have civil war in Syria. Now we're I remember watching Senator John McCain go over to the Middle East, and he's like, yeah, we need to arm these rebels. I'm like, this is before like ISIS kind of came into the forefront. And we're running our small news site at safrep.com, and we had guys over on the ground in Syria. I'm like, wait a minute, those rebels that you want to arm are actually, like, some of them are terrorists and some of them are ISIS.
Well, and
so we're like repeating the same process.
I think
all
there's
over
still
again.
confusion as to who's a peaceful rebel and who's ISIS. And, and then of course we were once on Assad's side. Now, I think the average American has zero clue what is happening in Syria. We have no idea who is on what side, which side ISIS is on, who the bad guys are. They're all bad guys in Syria. So what the heck are we doing? We're just making everyone hate us.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at it from that point of view and assign like some KPIs, like performance indicators, since 9/11, we have made the world a more unstable, dangerous place. And people probably, especially in the Muslim world, we've created many more enemies than we had pre-9/11. And so that just doesn't go a long way towards promoting stability and peace in the world. And that's a big problem where I see, and one of the reasons I believe in writing books and telling the stories from the guys that have been there, because I come back and I meet with, I have a friend who's a congressman, and he's a combat vet, but I've met a lot of these politicians, and they're quick to light the torch and beat the war drums. And I'm like, wait a minute, you don't have a clear understanding of the reality and ugliness of war. So
why don't you set up I'm just throwing out a random idea. Sorry if I do this.
Yeah.
Telling you what to do with your career now. Why don't you set up kind of a coaching company to coach these congressmen about what's really going on there? Because I feel like they don't know. And they're not really, they don't really have high IQs. So it's almost, that's not true for all of them. I've met some congressmen who are incredibly intelligent, but like, I feel like a lot of them don't even have the basic bullet points that they understand about the situation on the ground there. They're just taking orders from their leadership, which is being driven by polling as opposed to policy.
So that's a good question. And it's interesting because back when I lost my first business and I was working for L3, trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I ended up running a blog for military.com, and that did very well. And I said, I'm going to start my own spec ops site because there's all this interest on the internet around the world of special ops. Started the website SOFREP, and it was originally about information about the community and a little bit of community news. And when I recruited writers, all of a sudden it turned into a news site within 4 months because guys were reading stuff in the Journal, the Post, the Times, and they're saying, wait a minute, that's not what's happening over there. And so my writers, who are all special ops, combat vets, some of them working for the CIA, started to write op-ed pieces, and then some of them started breaking news because they cared about the world. And so that's kind of my coaching company. We can now, like, SOFREP has a million visitors a month, and I know we've triggered several congressional investigations into potential war crimes in different units. So I feel like we are getting the word out and trying to hold this apolitical line with the work that we do. But we have a guy right now in the Philippines looking at what's happening down there with the terrorists. We have had a guy in Iraq, Syria.
Right. So this is valuable, right? Like, you could basically go to foreign governments and charge millions to kind of, consult with their leaders, or you can have a sales guy who simply calls up the legislative assistant of every congressman and say, listen, sit down for a half hour with us.
Yeah.
Not even the congressman, just the legislative assistant. We'll explain to you what we can do, and then we'll need 5 hours a month from the congressman, and it costs X. I feel like that's a good business, and you're the only ones who can offer it, or one of the few people who can offer it.
Yeah. No, and it would be something to think about, but it's a problem that I see in society and in politics. These people don't have any clue on how really, really bad and ugly war is, especially on the conservative side. You see a lot of hero worship around the military. And
which, by the way, there should be. I mean,
there's nothing
I'm
wrong
not
with
saying the military is
respecting
not heroes. They're going and risking their lives for something they believe in. That's I'm not even taking an opposite side here. Like, anybody who's willing to do that, which I am not willing to do, that is a hero in my view.
Yeah, I don't want to take that away. It's more of this just
You're a hero.
thanks. It's more of this like polarized group in America, on the right and the left, and just I think there's a lack of understanding of really how terrible war is, and that's why I would go to the parties in New York City and get asked what I consider inappropriate questions like
How many people did you kill?
exactly, like that's the first one. How many people you kill? What's it like? So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna write a book. And because people would ask me after the Red Circle, hey, we want to know more about the sniper training. So, and there's a lot of value in that, like you mentioned earlier, with the mental management and the performance, personal performance stuff. But I wanted to give people the kind of, the uncomfortable look behind the curtain on what it's really like to take another person's life. What is war like? And what's it like when my friend Alex in the book shoots a bad guy in Afghanistan and watches in this village as his 13-year-old son runs out to like save his dad, and then he comes back and deals with that because he has his own son who's 13 and he broke down after the mission. So it's like those kind of things where it shows, look, this isn't a video game, it's not a movie, like this is serious stuff that we're doing. And
and there's a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder from returning veterans because of things like this. But I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm a little bit of an interrupter, but we have time. We'll get through each thing you want to say, I'm sure. But let me play devil's advocate a little bit. On the one hand, I'm saying America just seems to, and we're both kind of agreeing, America just seems to screw things up without a consistent foreign policy. We shouldn't try to police the world. We're just engendering more hate from, let's say, the Muslim community and the Middle East and so on, and maybe many other countries. But where is there a line? Maybe there's no line, but devil's advocate, Syria, a bunch of kids get a chemical attack on them. So you have these 11-year-olds with chemical injuries. And Barack Obama drew a line in the sand saying we're going to respond if Syria uses chemical warfare. Now here they used it on children. So Donald Trump now, using Obama's promise, did respond. Where is the line when we say, look, that's an evil we can't tolerate, and America, as big and blessed as it is, we have the resources to fight that evil. Where is the line? Should we fight that evil, or should we let countries work it out themselves?
I think it comes down with, if we have a clear strategy for what our Middle East policy is, the strategy would answer that question. And we don't, so we are very reactive. We're not proactive, we're reactive.
But as someone who's been there and you've seen it inside and out in every possible way, what's your answer to my question? Where is the line? Is there a line?
I mean, there should be absolutely a line. Interestingly, with the chemical weapons, when I look at the big picture, and we've studied Syria on our news site extensively. Our editor-in-chief interviewed Assad before Christmas. And
how'd you get that?
We got invited with the New York Times.
Wow.
So yeah, it was pretty.
Can you get him on my podcast?
We'll see. I could probably at least get you a shot at it. But the Assad, when you look at it from an incentive point of view, he had no incentives to use chemical weapons. The U.S. essentially was saying, "Hey, we're going to leave Assad alone and in power," because we were kind of taking a neutral stance towards Russia, which I think is a smart thing to do. Syria is important to Russia strategically because they have a big naval base in Syria, just like Bahrain is important to the U.S. because we have a big, I think it's Fifth Fleet has a big base in the Gulf, in the Arabian Gulf. So I just don't understand why Assad would be motivated to use chemical weapons when he knows the rest of the world is going to be polarized against him. That's what makes me question, okay, he doesn't have any incentive to do that in the first place. So who would benefit by, doing a chemical weapons attack, which ISIS has done before? Who would really benefit from kind of sucking the U.S. into that situation? So it's just, I think it's
doesn't seem like ISIS benefited though, because then we dropped that huge, the mega bomb on their kind of,
in Afghanistan, but it's Syria, and that's so. There's a lot of uncertainty and questions I still have around that. But yeah, if there's conclusive proof that Assad used chemical weapons, I mean, that is a line in the sand. I mean, but then again, the philosophical question is on killing, right? Like, is it a bomb, lethal injection, a sniper's bullet,
not only
a drone strike?
Not only on killing, but if that's the line in the sand, then the focus should, instead of being, well, take out the specific tactical people who did that, maybe you say, if that's the line in the sand, then take out Assad the same way we took out Saddam Hussein and the same way we took out the Taliban. But then you get back into nation building, which we haven't been very successful at the past 20 years.
Yeah, I don't think ever we've been very
Never.
successful.
Yeah, if you try to think about it, when have we, everyone always says imperialist USA. When did we ever take over a country and actually successfully turn them into a kind of mini USA?
Yeah, I can't think of a one example. I did want to comment too on Afghanistan. I felt very justified going over to Afghanistan post 9/11, destroying the terrorist camps, killing a lot of bad guys. And then we should have left. Like, Afghanistan has turned into my generation's Vietnam for sure. Like, it is
even
turned
worse,
into a
we're there much longer.
Shit show. Yeah, it's a tragedy when I see like these people that I knew in the SEAL teams literally change and become different people because they've been put into terrible situations over and over and over again. I don't even recognize some of my friends anymore. I mean, they're just different people. It's the psychology. They have this like glassed over look, and they've just seen too much. It's been too much exposure, not enough. And the special operations community, I think, has done a disservice internally because they haven't encouraged these guys to take a break, spend time with their family, rotate into a staff position, which means you are based in the U.S., you don't deploy, because promoting and advancing, they've been promoting like, oh, this guy's a hard charger, he's not taking a break. So they should have incentivized it the other way around. Like, if you want to promote up and get more pay, then you need to take a break and spend time with your family.
And by the way, to your credit, you've suffered criticism from within the special ops community for having this opinion. And I had another thing to your credit, but I'll think of it in a second.
Yeah, no, I've taken a ton of criticism because I've said stuff like this, and I've talked about stuff that nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to hear about guys coming home and getting a stem cell injection so they can behave normal at the family dinner table for 3 months. Like,
how does a stem cell injection help with that?
There's some, I don't know the exact medication, but they're injecting something.
I feel like I need that for my Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, no kidding. But there's some kind of drug they've been injecting in these guys to basically tone them down after they rotate back from deployment because they're just so high strung.
I'm wondering why something like lithium won't do it. Like, just kind of if after you've been in Afghanistan or a country like that for a dozen years, it's just automatic requirement, 3 months of lithium just to kind of calm down and neutralize any sort of, maybe latent bipolar tendencies or PTSD or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I just know that we wrote an article on SoftRep a couple weeks ago about the medics over there issuing the guys speed. And, these guys are going out on 2-3 hits a night sometimes, back-to-back missions.
Methamphetamine or amphetamine?
You know what? I honestly don't know. I'd have to go back and look, but I think it's some sort of amphetamine. I mean, these guys are staying up and then they're getting hooked on it. And then we're casting them aside.
And then, of course, casting them aside, what speed does is it hooks to the same receptors that dopamine in the brain hooks to. So if you take enough of it, to keep going in these these high stress war situations, your body is going to say, oh, okay, I don't need to make any more dopamine. It's being supplied to me. So once they get back home, they get depressed, they get suicidal, they have no more ability to make dopamine, they get violent. But I now remember what I was going to say. Also, to your credit, you've built a business helping returning special ops people kind of find business opportunities for themselves and either working for you or for others or and so on. So I think that's a huge thing that you've done for that community.
Yeah, no, I probably 90% of my employees are veterans, and I had one of the best compliments a few months ago from my friend Matt Meeker, the founder of BarkBox. Matt was like, man, your ops guy does the work of 4 staff. Do you realize that? Like, I have 4 people to do what he does for you guys on your
in my very
operations.
first company, my best employees, male and female, were ex-Israeli army people, and some of my best investments out there are, I don't know why it's always Israel, but it's ex-Israeli army people, because also it's not just that they're fighters, but at least in Israel, there's a lot of respect for cybersecurity and cyber warfare. So I'm invested in that area as well. And those guys are the experts because they have to protect their country in a very real way. It wasn't theoretical.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're just very disciplined and problem solving, and they're not going to sit around. If they don't know what to do, they're going to ask or go figure it out.
So let me ask you another question on the devil's advocate side. And this is something I've tried to research, and there's so many books on it and so many podcasts and so many differing opinions, but it's Islam itself. And, of course, if you take the Old Testament and the New Testament literally, there's a lot of violence. People used it in the, medieval ages to justify the Crusades. Of course, in the Old Testament, Joshua had to kill every man, woman, and child in, what became Palestine to, right after Moses. So there's a lot of violence there. But there's also a lot of love mentioned in the Old Testament and the New Testament, particularly the New Testament. I'm saying this as a Jewish person. In the Quran, there's also a lot of love mentioned and a lot of peace, but there's also a lot of calls for violence. And so just like you can't take the Bible so literally, is there more encouragement within the Muslim religion to take the words of the Quran literally, maybe because it's a more recent document? Or what's the story? Is this really a fight of religions, or is it a nation fighting, or what is the fight?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something I've thought about or thought on for a long time. I think of it, as radical Islam. The reason it has spread in the Middle East is because you have a social and political situation that is not very good. If you're you have these, like Saudi Arabia, for example, a royal ruling class, very elite, and then you have this very, the working population is extremely poor. The working conditions aren't very good. So you have that system that exists, right? And it's very similar to when you look at the U.S. and why a lot of people, myself included, join the military. You have young men who are kind of trying to find their way in the world, maybe frustrated, and joining the military as a way to kind of it's this cause, right? They're like, oh, I'm going to join this and be part of something and find my way.
Let's stop to take a quick break. We'll be right back. If you're a small business owner struggling to get a handle on your taxes, God bless you. I feel for you. I really do. But have no fears. FreshBooks is here to help. FreshBooks is ridiculously simple cloud accounting software that will help you cruise through tax season. It keeps all of your cash flow details in one place so you know exactly what your income is. And their mobile app allows you to take pictures of your receipts and organizes them for later, which makes claiming expenses a total breeze. Gosh, you know what? I'm going to start using this because I need to do this. FreshBooks, I hope you give me a deal. Oh, there is a deal here. But first off, I should say you're going to feel completely zen once tax time does come around, which I guess it means you'll feel this inner sense of nirvana about taxes. And then to get started with a 30-day free trial, which is what I'm going to do, go to freshbooks.com/James and enter the code James in the How Did You Hear About Us section. That's freshbooks.com/James and enter the code James in the How Did You Hear About Us section. The Casper is an obsessively engineered mattress at a shockingly fair price. Supportive memory foams create an award-winning sleep surface with just the right sink and just the right bounce. Try Casper for 100 nights risk-free in your own home. If you don't love it, they'll pick it up and refund you everything. Casper understands the importance of truly sleeping on a mattress before you commit, especially considering you're going to spend a third of your life on it. Free shipping and returns to US and Canada. With over 20,000 reviews and an average of 4.8 stars, it's quickly becoming the internet's favorite mattress. My podcast engineer, Nathan, you're listening to this right now as you're editing this, I'm sure, loves his Casper mattress. He's been sleeping on one for the past year and a half and said it's the most comfortable mattress he's ever used. I'd asked if he'd buy one again. He said yes, he would definitely buy another Casper mattress if his apartment ever magically created an extra bedroom. He even told me how it helped his wife sleep better. She's had insomnia her entire life, and while a mattress doesn't undo insomnia, Casper has helped her fall asleep and stay asleep more than any other holistic technique she tried. So if you're listening to this and finally thinking about creating a better night's sleep for yourself, try Casper. You can get $50 towards any mattress purchase by visiting www.casper.com/James and using offer code James. Terms and conditions apply. Again, I encourage people to read The Killing School because that's your latest. But the Red Circle, or Red Circle, is there a "the" in there? I forget.
The Red Circle.
The Red Circle, which is your memoir, you kind of describe very lucidly how your father was thrown out of his house at the age of 16. And then when you were 16, almost like history repeated itself, he just essentially or metaphorically threw you off a boat in the South Pacific and you kind of had to find your way. And part of finding your way and at the age of 16, that kind of missing parental love or not understanding how parental love works creates this hole that needs to be filled. And I think the military, American military, just like any military in the world, just like Al-Qaeda or the jihadists, they're willing to fill the gaping hole of someone who is suffering.
Yes. And so that's why I make the comparison. Coming back to the Middle East, you have these situations where, religion is a big part of that culture. They find their young, frustrated men. They find this religious cause, and all of a sudden, they can become a martyr. Their family they know their family's going to get potentially taken care of with money that martyrs' families get. And
is that true? Like, is there kind of a fund for martyrs?
Yeah, I mean, and Iran is a big part of that. As a state sponsor of terror, Iran is funding that and fueling that conflict in the Middle East, especially with Israel. And so you have that situation that exists that creates and radicalizes a lot of young men around the world, and that's why the internet, the advent of the internet, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. But now we're so connected. That's how you can some kid can get radicalized here, and this, through the internet. So it's
so I feel like you have these 18-year-old jihadists fighting these 18-year-old Americans, and they're all killing each other. And you were training them on the American side to be, better killers than the other side. But I'm not equating the two. Like clearly, clearly with Afghanistan, they provoked. Like they did this amazingly terrifying thing that rallied the world against them and Afghanistan. With Iraq, I think, of course, that's become a much more conflicting issue for many people, which we could talk about in a second. But what I'm really wondering is this, as some people say, a war against religion, or is that propaganda? Because I have no clue.
I think you have people that support blindly, I would say, blindly support war in America are very polarized around religion. And it's that whole, back to the whole Crusades. I mean, you look at the army and these unit patches, they're emulating the Crusades. That's in the patches. We know that in the army, particularly, if I had to rate the different branches of the military, army is very, very conservative, based in that neoconservative Christianity. And I know of chaplains who are in the Middle East telling members of their units to that this was literally a holy war in Iraq, and that's we've reported on a few of these stories.
Even though Iraq, again, like in the early 90s before Kuwait, I don't want to say Saddam Hussein was a nice guy, because clearly he wasn't. Just like almost every foreign leader in every continent, half of them at least are brutal dictators. But he was the most secular in kind of the hardcore Middle East. Like women had more rights. It was just more. You would recognize more things there than Saudi Arabia if you were an American.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, the second Iraq invasion was a terrible mistake. But it's, hindsight's 2020. And it's tough because we've, wasted trillions of money. And I say wasted because, and I can back that up, in Afghanistan, Iraq, and you create this instability and then just pull out, and it makes this vacuum. And so I think Obama should have said, look, we've done a terrible thing. It was the wrong thing to do, but we have to invest and make sure that we leave Iraq a stable country. And I just think we failed the Iraq people by pulling out and leaving a complete, shit show, for lack of a better term. And I hope I can cuss on here.
Oh yeah. Well, look how I started. And and this is not a Democrat or Republican thing. Like, Bush started the shit show. Obama had 8 years to fix it. Now Trump has the potential to fix it. And I don't know how you fix it. Like, Iran is more powerful than ever. I think we've kind of created a permanent change situation from the 90s where things might have been in some sort of stasis. And I don't know if there's a solution. And by the way, I'm not being overly sympathetic to them either. Like, they were brutal dictators, violent. All the propaganda on our side was probably largely true. It's just that we never crossed that line before. And we used their brutality as an excuse to invade. We didn't invade Rwanda, but we invaded Iraq. Like, we could have used the line in many places.
Well, and then you look at Libya, right? So Libya, Gaddafi largely under control, not, when you look at his past, I mean, at that period, he was largely, a stable dictator. And we went and kind of supported the overthrow of Libya during the Arab Spring. And then getting to our foreign policy strategy, and we did Jack Murphy, the editor of our news site, and I wrote a book on Benghazi, because we had people coming to us from the State Department to CIA saying, look, you guys need to get the facts out. So the situation in Benghazi, now Benghazi is not the capital of Libya, but it's where the power base is and all the militias are. So that's why we had that consulate. The State Department had the consulate in Libya. The CIA had a base up there, and JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, which controls SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, they had a presence in Benghazi. So now you have a situation where the CIA is hunting down, uranium and running their program. The State Department's trying to get a handle on the geopolitical situation, and the CIA is recruiting spies. And then you have JSOC executing a kill list that's authorized by Obama, and
who's on the kill list?
I'd have to go back and look, but they're essentially killing, what they think is, terrorists and promoters of terrorism. The problem was they were executing the kill list, and they would kill somebody that was on the CIA's payroll. So now these militia guys are like, wait a minute, my buddy here, I knew was working with and cooperating with Americans, and JSOC just kicked in his door last night and shot him in the head. So
I thought that was all supposed to be coordinated back in with the Department of Homeland Security, like start coordinating the communications between the different factions.
So you have the DOS, Department of State, JSOC, and the CIA all running their own programs, not on the same sheet of music. In some cases, JSOC killing CIA spies, or what they call assets, as paid informants. And it creates a bunch of anger and confusion with the local militias. They're like, hey, what the hell are these Americans doing?
And not only that, it
two-faced.
makes it harder for each agency to recruit new assets if they're going to just get killed by other agencies.
Yeah, and and you have a career bureaucrat, Patrick Kennedy, running the State Department as Undersecretary of Management, very powerful guy, not a very liked guy.
He's not the Patrick Kennedy that's the son of Ted Kennedy, is he?
He is a Kennedy. I don't know if he's Ted's son or not.
Okay.
But essentially, Benghazi goes down. I lost the best friend in Benghazi, Glenn Doherty, was one of the SEALs, and kind of one of the reasons I wrote the book After the Red Circle, Among Heroes, because I lost so many really, really good friends. And again, that's the casualty of war. We've had some really, really bright people that we've lost since 9/11, and that's the tragedy. Guys that were incredibly smart and gifted and talented, and even you look at what was the football player that joined the Rangers, Pat Tillman, gave up I think almost $4 million NFL contract to join the Rangers, was killed in Afghanistan. So we just generations, we've lost a lot of talent in this generation.
I feel like I feel well read on all the topics. I've obviously, like many Americans, have followed the news since day one. I mean, I don't read the newspaper on a daily basis because I view the news as just sort of the rough draft of history.
Yeah.
But I do feel like books like yours become the second and third drafts of history, and that's where I get my knowledge. And then just for my own sake, I read the translations of the Quran when the ones that I think are the most sensible. There's so many out there, you have to kind of pick and choose. And it's so confusing. That's why I ask, it's rare I get a chance to talk to someone like you who might have a more on-the-ground understanding of the macro issues, but I feel like I could talk to you about that forever. I just kind of leave these questions for maybe the listeners to start wondering, some of your answers that you've given that have been great. But I do want to get to your career. So, you obviously went through the brutal Navy SEAL training and then the brutal sniper training. And you saw how, it became complacent in the 90s because we weren't really at war with anybody. But then when we really needed it to live, you made the point that we could no longer use spotters. So that changed the whole, used to be a sniper would shoot and a spotter would say, well, the wind's going in this direction and here's how much you missed by. But then it became the case that the sniper had to also do his self-spotting, and you recognized that and changed the school accordingly. So you did a lot of things to kind of take the skill of being a sniper to a new level, which I think, not to talk too much, but you look at any endeavor that requires peak performance, like let's just say tennis.
Yeah.
Every generation, the coaches of tennis realize, now tennis players can no longer look like Arthur Ashe or John McEnroe. They need to start lifting weights. So training reaches a whole new generation, and the people in one generation could essentially destroy in performance the people from the older generation. I feel that's what you did for kind of this skill set. But how did you you get to Afghanistan? What are some of the things you saw and experienced? And let's talk about that a little.
Yeah. So so I was early on a sniper as a new guy. Our platoon of 16 needed. They were down 2 snipers. So our chief one day comes to myself and Glenn Doherty, which is the guy that gave his life in Libya, one of the SEALs, CIA guys. Said, hey, you guys are going to go to sniper school. So we were new guys, and new guys didn't get that opportunity. So we were excited but terrified because at the time it was a very high attrition rate. I mean, 30% of the guys washed out.
What does that mean? Like, I always hear that, like, 9 out of 10 people are going to quit. Yeah. Where do they go after they quit? Are they just like fired from the Navy, or what happens?
So that course was one of the only ones you could fail, and it wasn't really a reputation hit. Because if you were a SEAL and went to school and failed, chances are you'd have a performance review board. Your, shining gold Navy SEAL pin would be yanked off your chest, and you'd get sent back to the regular Navy.
That's got to be
which has
humiliating.
happened. Which has happened. It's happened. Guys get cocky, and it's a lesson that I've written about in all my books. Is like, look, you have to earn that that seal pin every day. It's not something you earn and have and can rest your laurels on. You have to continue to, today is a new day. The only easy day is yesterday. That's one of our mottos.
The only, say that again, the
only easy day was yesterday.
So, and I don't want to interrupt for a second, but when I read in the Killing School and in the Red Circle about your training, and I've read it in other books, I've talked to other special forces people, and I look at myself. So I consider myself an extremely disciplined, hardworking person. I've succeeded in my own efforts, but I look at that training. How would someone like me ever even survive half a day of like the first 20 minutes of Navy SEAL training? How would I survive?
I think it's one of those things you have to be open to it at that time in your life. This has to be something you really, really want. It's like, I know you've been practicing the stand-up comedy. I mean, that's a terrifying thing to get up in front of an audience in that way and deliver that material and try and get the laugh. So it's just when you're in the mindset, you're like, I just want to do this, and I think it becomes easier. But
and you mentioned even some like mega athletes, like Olympic level athletes, would just be in tears at the end of the day, and like 100-pound weaklings would be no problem.
Yeah, what it comes down to, they run all these crazy tests for the SEAL candidates. They poll you, they survey you, like what sports did you do, where did you grow up, blah blah blah. And I'm thinking all you have to write is one questionnaire. Like I could literally determine who's going to, a high degree of probability who's going to make it and who's not. I would say, have you experienced tremendous adversity in your life? Yes, no, and then please describe if yes. Because all the guys that I know that had no problem making it through SEAL training, which in my class, we had 220 students and we graduated 23 originals. But we had all experienced hardship, whether it's my friend Mike Ritland getting woke up at 4 a.m. to work the farm in Iowa before he goes to school, or myself getting, essentially thrown out of the house, which was a sailboat, a floating home in Tahiti, and finding my way back. So that's, the adversity is a key component of what allows guys to pass and be successful, not physical fitness. I mean, you read the Red Circle. I was in terrible shape.
I feel like I've experienced adversity, and maybe now I'm just thinking of this in the mind of a 49-year-old instead of a 21-year-old. But even I feel like I'm in better shape now than I was 21. I would not survive the first, like you said, the first thing of the day, and okay, I quit. I'm done.
Yeah, no, it's tough, and there's a line in the Killing School I talk about, going through SEAL training, and then the advanced SEAL training is like hammering and forging this like hard piece of steel. And then sniper school, which is completely mental, and it's one of the most stressful things I've ever done. It's like you take that forged steel and you mill it into this precision instrument.
Why was that more difficult for you than, I don't know, doing 1,000 push-ups in 11 minutes or whatever the crazy things you were doing before were?
It's just, it comes down to, you're in a school that has, being a sniper in the SEAL community comes with a tremendous amount of respect. For me as a new guy, I didn't want to go back to my platoon having failed, because they were relying on Glenn and I to pass so they could meet the minimum sniper requirement. And so you're under all this pressure, and then they put you in these situations that are incredibly stressful, where you'll be lying down, say, at 800 meters, and sometime between now and the next hour, your target will appear 800 meters away. So you have to get on that scope and, not just wait for your target to appear. Now you're at 800 yards going, okay, what's the wind doing at my position, halfway, and at the target, and how do I adjust for that?
And there are ways to, like, you don't really, like, just because the wind is moving one way where you are, the wind might be moving a different direction 800 meters away.
So you have to pay attention to all the environmental conditions. And when you get out about 1,000 meters, you actually account for the Earth's rotational spin, called the Coriolis effect, which is why airplanes fly in a kind of a curved route from New York to the UK.
What I'm just trying to understand technically here. So that means from 800 meters away, do you kind of like aim a millimeter or two off of what you think?
Depending on 800 meters, I wouldn't worry about the Coriolis effect.
That's
I'm more
half a mile.
concerned about wind and barometric pressure. And we plug it all into this PDA and it spits out a firing solution for us. But, if things change...
What do you mean a firing solution? Like it tells you where to aim
it tells
the
you
gun?
how many minutes of angle to increase your elevation at your yard line. And depending on, it's like flying an airplane, depending on your barometric pressure, determines relative density, less density.
And so you're adjusting that with your arms, right? Can that be automated? So you're putting the gun in the device?
We have a precision scope. So we're actually dialing in the elevation, dialing in the windage. So back 1,000 meters or more, depending on your degree of latitude and your magnetic bearing to the target, the Earth's rotational force could counter out wind. So sometimes you're like, well, the wind is blowing right to left. Why am I holding center when I should be holding into the wind, but the Earth's rotation may be countering out the wind, so you hold center. So it's all stuff we get into and teach these guys. When we put them in these tremendously stressful situations, you're expected to just make snap decisions, and you have to continue to score 80% or higher and all the evolutions. So it's incredibly stressful. You don't get much sleep. You're put under a ton of stress. You're learning, everything about ballistics, internal, external, terminal ballistics. Learning these formulas to hold elevation at close, especially in urban environment like Iraq, where you may dial in a certain range on your gun because you know that your shots, maybe the longest shot you have to take in this urban situation would be 600 meters. So you dial in 300 on your scope, and then you're holding up or down depending on the range of the target. So it just, we put them in these incredible, as an instructor, put these students in incredibly tough situations. They have to make decisions very quickly. And we have a funny saying, the SEALs, like, oh, that guys would make a good breacher. And the breachers are the guys carrying all these heavy explosives on their back and cutting torches and axes to bust through doors. And but not a high degree of intelligence to bust through, or put explosives on the door. And it's like either he's a good breacher or a good sniper. And so
I think the Bradley Cooper playing Chris Kyle in American Sniper sort of refers to that when he's the sniper on the roof and he's watching all the Marines bust down door to door where they're really taking this enormous risk that there could be a bomb on the other side of the door, and he's like, I'm glad I'm not those guys.
Yeah, exactly. And so which is leading up to my experience as a sniper, I had a lot of helicopter airborne sniper experience doing real-world shipboardings at night, enforcing the UN sanctions against Iraq for the oil smugglers. I was on the USS Cole right after it got hit as a sniper, then went to Afghanistan, to your earlier question, and most of my operational sniper experience was very different than, say, Chris Kyle's, which is in Iraq, fighting house to house, street to street. Mine was doing actual reconnaissance missions, hiding in the mountains, reporting targets, calling in air assets to eliminate targets to not expose my position. And that was more of, and that's a very valid sniper op where we send guys in to basically hunt and track.
Right, and you refer to this, it seems like there's two types of training in sniper school, which is the gun and all the ballistics that you just mentioned and all the technology behind it and shooting and so on. And then there's what you call stalking, which is essentially how do you move even like 5 feet, a millimeter at a time, so you're completely undetected. And, I never really thought of that as something. I just figured, okay, you guys wear camouflage and you'd be really quiet. Is there more to it?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not leaving anything behind. You pack it in, you pack it out, leaving no trace. The shoes that you wear, how you leave trace, not leaving trace behind when, human beings are generally sloppy. In Afghanistan, we were tracking bad guys. They were in fighting positions. We would track them, find out where they were like camping out at night, mark the position, and then once we had a clear understanding and we've kind of swept this valley and we've identified all the enemy positions, then we would just call in, get on the radio and call in an airstrike on all the positions in less than 2 minutes, they'd all be wiped out. So that's the kind of sniper missions I was on in Afghanistan. But coming back, they said, look, normally you get to choose your orders. But at this time, we were under this massive reorganization after 9/11, and we stood up this centralized training command, where before all the training happened at the individual SEAL teams. Now we had this central command. And they said, hey, we need your expertise. And I got placed in advanced sniper training. So we were working with our already existing snipers and training them to operate in helicopter, urban, rural environments, and kind of ramp up their level of training. And then got recruited by a guy named Bob Nielsen, who was a SEAL Team 6 guy. He said, hey, I want you to come down and help us modernize the sniper program, make it better. And that's where I finished my career out.
So let's talk about that, and then we'll close with kind of the final stage of your career. But rather than the specific techniques you use to advance the sniper school, although that's interrelated, what are you were basically training people to be peak performers in incredibly high stakes situations. It wasn't just target practice. People were also shooting at them. It's like what Mike Tyson says. You can have all the plans in the world until someone punches you in the face and all the plans go out the window, which I'm sure is, part of dealing with the psychology of being on the ground in a place like Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever. So you tell this great story about visualization, and that kind of led to your philosophy of teaching. Maybe describe that situation.
Yeah, so we got into redesigning the course, and we started to look to the best in the world. The gold medalist level elite athletes. The Tiger, who was coaching Tiger Woods, and seeing what all these peak performers were doing, and currently, like presently, and then we went back in time as well, and we realized visualization was a big part of peak performance. Mental rehearsal, like rehearsing procedures and routines, and also rehearsing to perfection. Because when we started to expect students to perform on a perfect level, for the first time, they started performing perfectly. Where before, students would ask, hey, is it okay? I know 80% is the minimum, but what's a good score on this test? And maybe an instructor would say, oh, if you're shooting 90, that's pretty good. It's like, no. We changed our whole thought process, because we expect you to shoot 100, like a perfect score. Like that is the kind of the gold or platinum level standard. And when we started talking that way to our students and saying that's what we expect, they started performing at that level. And we were teaching them how to visualize for perfection, visualize that things are going to go wrong, right? Like we all know nothing. Like you mentioned earlier, no plan survives the first punch usually. Mm-hmm. But we would rehearse that first punch in the face scenario. What if this happens? What if that happens? And then have the champion's attitude of, I don't care if my scope falls off the gun, I'm going to shoot you with iron sights because I have the skill level and the commitment to do that. So, and I think we've seen, everyone's seen that example in life where we've all had friends or known somebody where they're whether it's golfing or doing something, skiing, something goes wrong and it's like, oh, the end of the world. The champion's attitude is like, look, if my equipment fails, like I'm going to either like make a slingshot and whack that guy in the head, or I'm just going to do whatever it takes to win because I know I have the ability and the commitment to do that.
And you call it mental management, and you say there's 3 rules in mental management. Maybe go over those and how you and how they work, and how maybe I can apply them in my life, or someone listening, sitting in a cubicle or on a treadmill or whatever, or they're commuting into work. How can they apply these skills to their own issues and problems and areas where they want to perform at a peak level?
Well, the big thing, I mean, and when I look at the core things we did in the sniper program, we modernized it, so we stopped sketching targets out on pen and paper or pencil and paper, and we taught the guys digital photography, satellite communications. that's all the modernization. When we look at what we did to increase the number of graduates, and we took a course that was failing about 30%, and when we implemented positive over negative psychology from a teaching point of view, we started where we would point out mistakes in the past. We said, no, we're programming these guys as beginners with bad habits. So they don't even realize the mistakes they're making. And we're calling them out and putting it in their head. If you're someone telling you not to do something, like, hey, don't strike out before you go up to bat, all you're thinking about is striking out. So we changed the way we talk to the students.
Is that true? Like if people say don't screw up, are you more inclined to screw up than if someone says do well?
I've seen it where I'll literally be on the firing line and I'll say, hey, don't flinch. And the guy will flinch, or, hey, don't do this. And it's just like right before they shoot, and it's just like they think about it and then it transfers to behavior. So I've seen it. So, and that has to do with the mental management is self-talk. How do we talk to ourselves? If you think of yourself like, oh, I'm like I've always been pretty good at math. Maybe not your level, but
I don't know about that.
But I got out and I started a business, and I was like, oh, I don't want to, like, these financial statements, I'm just not good at this. And I started thinking of myself that way. But then I was like, I caught myself and said, wait a minute, I just need to learn the numbers. I need to go take a QuickBooks class and learn, the finances. It's simple arithmetic, but it's that self-talk. So I was able to correct myself. And that's what we teach the guys in the sniper school. Like, if you're coming here thinking that you've never been that good of a marksman, you need to change that self-talk, and it starts with yourself and that mental management. So
let's say I'm 50 years old. I've been working in one big corporation for 30 years. I'm afraid to lose my job. I'm paying for mortgage and kids, and I don't know if I can change or do the things I always love to do. What would be like so I'm saying to myself every day, I can't do this. Yeah. What would be some self-talk that can help me?
I would literally, it's as simple as saying, I can do this, and inventing that narrative to support it, that plan and goal.
But every time, every step of the plan, so much comes up negative, like, oh, you can't do that because you've got to feed the kids at 6:30 in the morning, and you have to be home at 8, and blah, blah, blah.
So I would develop solutions for all those problems, because it is one of the things that I've gotten so many great lessons from the military and the SEAL community. And like, as new guys, we weren't even allowed to complain about a problem unless we brought 2 or 3 solutions to the table.
That's really interesting. So you can't complain, and you say this, don't focus on the problem, focus on the solution. Yep. So don't complain about a problem unless you have at least 2 or 3 possible solutions. Now, I guess the instructor might have better solutions, but you still have to you have to show that you've been thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I had a guy, this guy Chuck in my first platoon. He had this problem with this weapons mount, and rather than complain, he just like had the armorer machine a new mount and invented this whole new system that was adopted team wide. So it was like, rather than just bitch and moan about the problem and that this thing wasn't working, he invented a solution, and it ended up being adopted across the entire SEAL community. So it was always, look, if you're having a problem with something, whether it's a procedure, you could bring it up, but you better have a solution. And
part of that is
that mindset is important.
Even if the solution's not correct, part of that is just exercising that muscle of creativity, putting yourself in solution creating mode.
Yeah,
you might not come up with the correct solution, but at least it puts you in the mindset that oh, I'm good enough to maybe think of these things.
And when you start doing it over and over and develop a habit, look, nobody lives a perfect life. We all go through ups and downs, but it's how you choose to look at those downs. And it's like I was reading about your story this week, and I read one of your pieces on. It was an over 40 piece.
Oh yeah,
and I was like, wow, there's a lot of similarities there. I got out. I went all in. I invested and did pretty well in real estate when I was in the military, just in apartment buildings. And I sold everything and put it all into my first business, end up losing everything. And like everything I had, plus friends and family money. And literally a month later, my wife said, I want a divorce. Like, you put me through hell in the SEAL teams and combat. And now this, like, I want a 9-to-5 guy. And you're not that guy. And literally said, oh, by the way, the kids start school in 2 months. I'm moving up to my parents' ranch. And so here I am sitting all alone in this 3-bedroom house, having to have the conversations with all the neighbors, like, where'd your family go?
Were you scared?
And
were you ashamed?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of shame. And, as a SEAL, it was the first time I really felt like I'd failed at something.
How did you bounce back from that?
I remember, and I didn't want to let go of this project. It was this company and this big real estate training project east of San Diego. We had a race course and shooting ranges, and we're gonna, let the law enforcement come in and train. And it was just an environmental and political nightmare. And the project ended up dying after it was approved by the county. And I just didn't want to let go of it. I remember my friend John, who's a partner at the law firm that I still use today, Shepherd Mullen. John said, look, you got to let go, buddy. Like, I don't know how to tell you this.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate there. Like, could the positive self-talk, like, oh, okay, there's all these problems, I'm going to keep coming up with solutions. If you do that at too micro a level, it prevents you from stepping back and seeing, okay, maybe there's a better solution for my life than pursuing this smaller project.
Yeah, the big difference is recognizing failure from quitting, right? And quitting would have been like, you know what? Because when I got out of the Navy, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. My parents were entrepreneurs. Funny thing, they're both hippies, right? My dad picked my mom up hitchhiking in Malibu, and he was a hippie from Canada, and it helped his buddies burn draft cards, and they're looking at me like, my mom was like, how does my little boy like want to be a Navy SEAL? What happened? What went wrong? So it was just interesting dinner conversations around that, but I forget what the hell were we talking. You were asking me about.
So could the positive self-talk be delusional?
Yes. So
same thing.
What I was getting at was quitting versus failure. So failure is necessary to be successful. I'm certain about that. And so look, I recognize. Look, I failed at this. Like, this was a failure. I lost all my money. But on the positive side, I started thinking about, wait a minute, I learned so much. I raised $3.8 million in debt and equity, learned like all these lessons, like know how to read financials, know how to go out and get a business loan to buy a business if I want. So I have all the knowledge. So, I could literally, jump off the bridge right now and be depressed and feel sorry for myself, or I can pull up my socks, realize like this failure was a critical part of my journey and experience to the next chapter. And so I just said, you know what, I'm gonna look at it from a positive. What are all the positives that came from this situation?
So as opposed to being micro and saying, what are the positives that can help me make this situation work? You finally reached the point where you took a step back, and I guess you were forced to do that. Like, you knew that it was over.
Yeah.
And so rather than saying, maybe you went through this for a little bit, but rather than saying, I can't get off the floor, you started to reframe the conversation like, okay, I've got to move forward.
Yeah, I've got to. And I took a job. I took an executive position with a big defense company. It made more money than I ever made in my life. But realized...
Were you like a lobbyist or?
No, I was a director of business development for L3, a division of L3, which was an incredible learning experience. I worked with just amazing people. It was an amazing experience, but it was an office job. I was running a classified radio program, kind of being a liaison between the U.S. Special Operations Command and our internal engineers, which always were brilliant people, but would come up with all these crazy ideas and want to spend, $2 million of internal research and development on a product that I knew that the guys on the ground, would end up using as a paperweight. So
it's very valuable.
Being that guy back and forth. And then what I did also was I had contacts at General Atomics. General Atomics and the Blues Brothers were really the leading thinkers behind the unmanned aerial vehicles.
The Blues Brothers?
Yeah.
What's that?
I think it's Neil and Lyndon Blue at General Atomics.
Oh, okay.
Privately
Not the movie.
Yeah, not
John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah, different kind of Blues Brothers. The Predator Blues Brothers. So they invested in the Predator way early on, and the government laughed at them at the time. And then, of course, 9/11 happened and the Predator blew up. So I was getting L3, their signals intercept technology in the pipeline to be put on the Predator, which is hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue to them. But I was like a cage rat, wearing a suit every day. I go on a 2-week trip, bring back a bunch of great business, and then I would come in late at the office and I'm like, hey, where are you? Why aren't you at the office? I'm like, God, I feel like a cage rat. And I was blogging as a hobby on the side.
And they were okay with that?
Yeah, they were okay with it. And
you probably had top secret clearance at that point.
Yeah, I had a top secret clearance. I was, I disclosed the blog, and they knew I was trying to sell a book. At the time, Marcus Luttrell, who was a friend of mine, wrote Lone Survivor. He encouraged me to write my story because I was blogging and writing for magazines. And I got turned down like 6-7 times. At the time, nobody...
Welcome to publishing.
Yeah, nobody gave a shit about the SEAL stuff, right? And then there was a time where if you were a SEAL, you could write about anything and a publisher would pay you 6-figure advance. I got $25,000 and a shot from Mark Resnick at St. Martin's Press. And, the book did very well. L3, because I'd earned it, they gave me a sabbatical. And then I launched a small website, and the website took off. I got a bunch of, back when the advertising industry was very different, we got a ton of ad revenue first year, and then I just said, look, I'm not coming back.
So going, I wanna finish with that, but going back to sniper school and the very first thing you talk about with mental management is visualization. And you give the example of this guy who was a prisoner of war for 6 years, and every day he would visualize himself playing golf. And of course, he would visualize he played it perfectly. And then the first day he's released, he goes to a golf course and he scores like 25 points better than, I don't know.
I think he shoots par, 18 holes par.
Yeah, he shot 74 as opposed to 100 on his very first time back. And they were all amazed because he was like, he hadn't been fed for 6 years, basically. He hadn't played golf in 6 years.
Yeah.
He wasn't a great golf player before, but he had just done so much visualization. And, there's
perfect visualization too, because they asked him, how is this possible? And he said, I haven't hit a bad shot in 4 years. I've been playing perfect golf in my head.
And so does that work? Because
absolutely.
That's like, there's a book, The Inner Game of Tennis, and there's also The Inner Game of Golf. And there's the Zen of Archery. There's all these things say the same thing. Visualization works.
It's huge. We studied visualization with the gold medalist, and visualizing those contingencies that happen and how you're going to deal with the contingencies. And so part of what we did at the sniper program we started graduating everybody. So we took a 30% failure rate to nearly zero. And it's because we changed the way we talked. We started coaching with positive teaching versus negative. So rather than focus and point out the mistakes, we would tell the guys what they need to do correctly. So we're inputting and programming the correct procedures. Then we told the guys how to self-talk, how to visualize for perfection and go visualize your performance over and over for perfection, visualize for contingencies, and then how to change the way that you talk to yourself, because we can be our own worst enemies.
So it's like almost like a meditation technique in the sense that
exactly.
People mistakenly have all sorts of mistaken opinions about what is meditation, but the reality is it's simply sitting there and noticing when you're thinking about something that's off track. And so I guess somebody gets into the habit of like negative self-talk, and you have to sort of notice it and then bring yourself back on track.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the guys we worked with, Lanny Basham, has an excellent program on mental management. We consulted with him, and his story was, look, I went to the Olympics. I spent all my life dreaming about the Olympics as a marksman. First Olympics he went to, he was on the bus, and the Russians were talking behind him like, oh, that's Lanny. He's expected to win. boy, it must be tough in his shoes, like all the pressure and cameras, and man, I'm glad I'm not landing. And they were basically like giving him shit. And he's sitting there thinking, oh my God, like all the cameras, like the pressure of the whole US is on me. And that was at a time where we were in a bit of a Cold War. And he said he caved under the pressure and still shot silver. But he's like, you only get one shot at the Olympics, and silver is the first loser, basically. And it's a big difference between gold and silver and on the performance spectrum. And so he went back and he went to all these psychologists and he said, what do I do to perform and win? And they all tried to make him feel better about losing. And he's like, no, that's not the right approach. So he started interviewing all these gold medal athletes and figured out that they had a different mindset. And it was like one of his friends shooting at the World Championship. He didn't have a spare gun. The gun broke down. He went to borrow a gun from one of his buddies. And he's like, as he picked up the gun, he's like, wouldn't this be a great story if I could tell my grandkids that I won the World Championship shooting a borrowed gun because mine broke and I didn't have a backup? He's like, that would be a great story. And he literally went on to do just that. And that's the mindset of a champion. And so, we taught our students how to have a mindset of a champion, how to self-talk to yourself.
How do you have the mindset of a champion? How do you get in? How do you visualize?
You visualize, you always take the optimist approach to anything, like adversity. If something goes wrong, you're like, how can I turn this into a positive? What can I learn from this, and how do I turn this into a positive? Because I know and I have the confidence. And the confidence comes from hard work too. I don't want to get away from that. Like these guys put for 3 months, our snipers put 7 days a week, probably 12 to 15 hour days in. And so you have to work hard. Nothing in life that I've ever achieved has come without the hard work.
So visualization, although in the case of this golfer, visualization almost replaced hard work, but let's leave that aside for a second.
But he was already a practiced golfer beforehand.
Right.
It's very different.
But the visualization you're saying is key to getting that next few points of performance, whether it's at a job or in a relationship or
which a lot is
sports.
Yeah, I read a lot, like I'm sure you do. And last year I read or whenever Tim's book came out, finally, The Tools of Titans, I was like, you know what? I got to start meditating and really get my morning routine dialed in. And so I started meditating every morning. I put myself through that Headspace app, and I'm like, wow, this is a lot like it's what we used to do. It was a form of meditation. And now when I meditate, I'm always applying that positive visualization, like how I want things to turn out in my life, how I want to think about, becoming fluent in Spanish, just the way I talk to myself and envision the future. I'm incorporating that.
So like before you take Spanish lessons, you might visualize yourself speaking Spanish or going through all the courses and, succeeding at the courses.
Yeah.
I want to get to, I think that's very valuable. I try to do visualization in my own different things. Like you mentioned, I've been trying to get better at stand-up comedy. So I did it Tuesday night, and literally before I went on, I was terrified. And so I just visualized myself going on. I visualized that feeling. I visualized more feeling. Like I felt that bond with the audience, and I visualized them laughing. And it worked, but I don't know. I'm hoping that was part of it, and I'll do it again. But I wanted to ask you about something we were talking about when we were setting up this podcast the other day. You mentioned like you're kind of taking your military experience and granularizing it into every possible potential entrepreneurial outlet. And you mentioned something just fascinating to me that's related to other things I'm interested in. You probably know what I'm talking about. Maybe describe that, and then.
Are you talking about the romance?
Yeah.
So, I look at from a career point of view. A career to me, rather than like people that go job to job, like a career is something where you can build on your past accomplishments and leverage those accomplishments to something out. That's why me and my fellow Navy SEAL authors take a lot of criticism because we're being in the public telling our story. But I don't know of any one of my SEAL friends that got out and left Navy SEAL off their resume, because it would be stupid to do so. So, I looked at, when I was blogging for military.com, I said, there's all this interest in the special ops world. Well, I'm going to create a blog to deal with this interest, create a friendly environment where people can ask questions, and that turned into our news site. But we have, today I think I have five core websites, our own podcast. We launched a television channel. We're doing our own books, and then I like to create. I've always been creative. I think my parents, we didn't watch much TV, and we do the movies, and I read a ton of books, growing up on a sailboat, with no TV in the middle of nowhere. You read a lot, and I've always been into fascinated, inventing these stories in my head, and being, now having this digital media publishing company and being able to create stuff I want to do a documentary on veterans transition and do it with my friends that are extreme mountain men and skiers and snowboarders, and took them recently to Chamonix and shot this amazing documentary. So I like to create, and I love to write as a creative outlet. But I was tired of doing the nonfiction stuff. I think the Killings...
Right. There's only so many times you can write your memoir.
Yeah, exactly. And in the Killing School, I have my reasons for that book. Now I'm shifting more to kind of how do I leverage into different areas. I taught Kamal, a mutual friend of ours, how to swim. And I taught him how to overcome his fear of water. And he says, you should do a book on fear. So I'm working on that one right now, on how to overcome your fear. But I wanted to do more fiction. I'm just wrapping up my first novel. It's about a serial killer on an aircraft carrier, based on we had a sexual predator on Abraham Lincoln when I was in the Navy.
You mentioned that in one of these books.
I think the Red
they
Circle.
never caught
him.
Yeah.
And so I imagine, what if it was a serial killer on an aircraft carrier, closed door mystery? So I, being the entrepreneur I am, I hired this Chinese MBA student, Zhang, and I'm like, hey, find out the most underserved market in fiction.
I like how you mentioned he was Chinese. Just that was a point that...
Yeah. Well, I don't know why I mentioned it, but I love
as opposed
Zhang.
to a Jewish MBA student.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I think it builds that visual image, because Zhang is awesome. And so he comes back, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, because I've always been a huge Star Wars geek and space, sci-fi nerd. And I'm hoping he comes back with science, sci-fi, and I'm going to write, about the modern day or the futuristic, Navy SEALs, space warriors and all this crazy stuff. And he's like, military romance. And he had all the data to back it up.
What kind of data? What did he see?
He looked at sales figures.
So you saw that military romance, the few military romances that are out there were blowing through the roof compared to other genres.
Not enough to meet the market demand. That romance as a genre was the most stable during up or down markets. I was overwhelmingly, the data supported military romance. And then I was like, oh man, I started thinking about, I've been getting harassed for the past 2-3 years by these legitimate romance authors. Women on Facebook and Twitter would send me direct messages and say, hey, I'm working on this proposal. Can you tell me about Navy SEAL training? I'm working on this proposal. Can you tell me about what deployment is like? Can you tell me the male-female mix, this and that? And I'm like, they're pimping me for information. And I would, out of respect, author to author, would start sharing with some of them. And then they would send me another follow-up with 100 questions. I'm like, hey, that's abusive at this point. Stop.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me, wow, they're all trying to jump into it, but none of them know what the hell they're talking about. They're good writers, but they don't have the knowledge to create that fictional world of military romance. And so I said, you know what, I want to create a romance series and work with a writing partner and direct this romance series. And so I sold a 3-book deal to St. Martin's Press. I showed him the report.
Is it okay? Can you say the economics of the deal?
I got, what do you like, the dollars and cents?
Yeah.
It wasn't a huge advance. I think we got $30,000 for 3 books, but I got a bigger percentage. I'm big on profit sharing now, and now like I heard you discuss when we were out the other day about the publishing platforms. We're to the point now where we have a big enough audience on my digital media. We're going to be our own publisher starting next year, so we're going to start publishing our own books.
Good.
But this to me was an experiment, and I said, look, I don't need a big advance. I would rather take a bigger royalty percentage. And own audio. I'm a big fan of owning audio rights. I have the Audio to Killing School and the Red Circle, and St. Martin's Press offered me like $5,000 for audio rights.
Forget it. You can make that in 1 month on the Killing School.
After they came to me and said, oh, "Whoops, we recorded your audiobook."
I'll just tell you, like Choose Yourself, which came out 4 years ago. I have, of course, all the audio rights. Just last month, I got a check for $6,000.
Yeah.
So, and this 4 years later. So audio rights is the gift that keeps giving.
Yeah, and my agent at the time, not my agent now, thought I was crazy because they ended up offering, I think, $15,000. And the Red Circle Audio, same thing. I just got a check for $8,000 last month. It just keeps on giving, and
So that's a fascinating way to come up with a genre idea and then execute it almost like a product management team would, as opposed to saying, okay, well, now I'm going to figure out the romance genre and be literary about it and write it. Like you kind of left the romance part to the experts. You'll do the military part. You figured out the place you needed to be to maximize revenues, and now you created that. And I think that's a good management skill to have as well. And I see you doing that across the board with your many businesses and efforts under one umbrella of kind of leveraging your vast experience as a sniper, a SEAL, in the armed forces and everything. I do want to take a moment to once again say people should definitely get The Killing School. I read it. It's a page turner, but also paired with The Red Circle, which is your memoir. I think they kind of go hand in hand, and I think it gives a really good understanding of what you did to create these peak performers, as well as what's happening on the ground there, and what are the pros and cons of what's happening.
I think it's an important piece to kind of read the story of the guys that have been there on the ground and been put in these situations and been out and had a chance to reflect. Because I think, I get this bias all the time living in New York. They automatically think I'm a certain way because I served in the military. I'm like, look, actually, I did vote for Obama. I do have a lot of liberal views. One of the things that bothered me most about coming back from Afghanistan was understanding the whole Guantanamo Bay situation. And I'm Canadian American. I was born in Canada, came to the U.S., and very, very much embraced the American way of life. But coming back and seeing that we had stripped, civil liberties away from human beings, regardless if they're bad or not. And we found out now in hindsight that a lot of the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay were improperly imprisoned and stripped of their basic civil liberties. And that's not what I was over there fighting for as a SEAL. Like, I was fighting for that American way of life, that we're fair, we treat everybody with due process. And to see an environment like Gitmo exist, which is just completely opposite of what I think American values should stand for, that was very disheartening as a combat veteran. And so I think where I surprise people all the time in New York and in conversations is I catch them stereotyping me and being very biased.
I think that's an important lesson in our, and I'll close with this. I think that's an important lesson in particularly in this last election. Like, regardless of your political beliefs, it doesn't have to be half the country versus the other half of the country. I think, and this is almost a cliche at this point, but there is important to understand the subtleties and the gray areas and all the issues, as opposed to just making a judgment.
Yeah, I had a quick story. My good friend of mine, John Bush, who owns a bunch of bars and restaurants in the city, just opened a new bar, has a lot of musician investors. Fat Mike, the lead singer of NoFX, a punk band, was sitting down with John at the restaurant. We were having beers, and having John introduce me, and he kind of like, oh, you're a Navy SEAL military guy. He kind of gave me that look. I'm like, oh, here we go again, because I've seen it all over. It's weird. Like the bias and discrimination in this city towards military guys is crazy. And he looked at me, he's like, oh, I bet you voted for Trump, didn't you? And I'm like, really? Like right out of the gate? And I said, and actually I split my time between Puerto Rico and New York. I'm technically a resident of Puerto Rico. And so I couldn't vote. Like Puerto Rico doesn't have an electoral vote. And he's like, well, who would have you voted for? And I was like, I don't know. Like, are we really going to get into this? And he's like, I bet you would have voted for Trump. And you're just one of those Trump assholes. And I'm like, really? I was like, Mike, you are exactly the problem that we have in this country in this past election, is you're so polarized with your view that you're not willing to sit down and learn my story, who I am, what are my experiences, what are my opinions, and even if they differ from yours, being able to have a dialogue. I think the dialogue is the problem that what's missing today, is that we're quick to just, we want to simplify things and say, we're right, you're wrong. But nobody's willing to kind of have that dialogue.
Yeah, imagine if James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, just said, oh, you're one of those Democrat Republicans, instead of writing the Federalist Papers, which, informed how we interpret the Constitution. Like, there was a tradition of dialogue in the United States, which has kind of been lost recently. But again, Brandon Webb, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So informative in so many ways. And The Killing School, Inside the World's Deadliest Sniper Program is your latest best-selling book. And thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I got to have you on our podcast now.
Excellent. I look forward to it. I'm not Special Forces,
and
but
I'm taking you up
for contribute. Oh yeah,
we're gonna go flying too.
We're gonna go flying. I'm
upside down.
To do that.
Yeah, upside down.
For more from James, check out the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network at jamesaltucher.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
Hey, thanks for listening. Listen, I have a big favor to ask you, and it will only take 30 seconds or less, and it would mean a huge amount to me. If you like this podcast, please let me know. Please let the team I work with know. Please let my guests know, and you can do this easily by subscribing to the podcast. Probably the biggest favor you could do for me right now, and it's really simple. Just go to iTunes, search for The James Altucher Show, and click subscribe. Again, it will only take you 30 seconds or less, and if you subscribe now, it will really help me out a lot. Thanks again.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.